podcast. I'm Lauren Tocci.
And I'm Ryan Tocci. Lauren, we're 13 days away from the Academy Awards.
You sandbagging son of a bitch!
Lauren, what do you like better, Christmas or award season?
Correct answer is award season.
Bingo! And we're off.
If you cannot tell, the energy in here is electric. It is almost the Oscars.
We got Oscars, we got a new studios here. We're all unpacked.
Yes, all of the lightsabers made it here safely. And they're on their shelves, lovingly displayed.
Only casualty is this desk that we're working off that's leaning a little to the right.
So, podcast fam, if you hear a loud thud halfway through the episode, it's the desk collapsing upon itself.
We could have probably moved to a different desk, but nah.
No, this is our podcasting desk.
Test this thing out until we get our money back for this desk.
We're going to see how far we can stretch this. Welcome, everyone. So we are back after a little bit of a hiatus just to get ourselves settled in.
Lauren, I've decided that I will no longer on this show tell people a schedule for our podcast.
Literally, you telling people the schedule is a jinx to the schedule. You are no longer allowed to map things out. When we do the whole discussion of this is the format, if you put, I'm going to explain the schedule to the audience, I'm going to say no, because then that schedule will not happen.
All episodes from now on are TBD.
That's the safest bet for us to go. So we are going to be talking today about the Oscars. If you cannot tell from our very enthusiastic opening, this is my favorite time, and I hope your favorite time of the year as well.
It's a whole episode about Oscar Isaacs.
I mean, mother may I?
Whoa. Hey now.
So what we are going to do is, this episode is going to be about the history of the Oscars, our personal history of the Oscars. Sometimes that Oscars got it right, and sometimes that Oscar got it wrong. But before we get to that, we want to do a little bit of Tossi's takes. Ryan, do you have a recommendation for this week?
Oh, I got two.
All right, so, dang.
Yeah, and you'll
maybe a little more time unpacking boxes and a little less time catching up on movies.
No. So I've got a reason for two. But let me just also start by saying that this episode will be rated PG-13 because 2 times during this show I'm going to curse, and I'm going to let you know, and I'm going to use one of the big words that you get only one of during a PG-13.
The F word.
Only I won't say oh fudge. But before that, my first word is the first recommendation I have, which is make cool shit.
Oh, yes.
It is a podcast that I highly recommend everybody. Not that I want you guys...
Please listen to our episode first and then go listen to this.
The Make Cool Shit podcast is really good. We found it because of the movie we talked about during our year-end called Scare Me, which was just one of my favorite movies of the year. Just absolutely amazing. And I highly recommend the film, obviously, again. But this actually was a podcast that documented over 8 episodes the making of the movie. So even if you don't ever watch the movie, that's fine. It is just a really interesting
you should definitely watch
podcast to listen to how films are made, and especially an independent film. So it's very interesting, highly engaging, and they're not long episodes. I think the longest episode's 30 minutes, so they definitely don't go to our school of...
No, they understand
They're
economy
much more
of time.
professional than us.
But I will say what's really fun about it, too, is, if you're someone who even has a light interest in filmmaking or just movies in general, it's really fun for that. And this is a podcast that was created over 18 months of them recording for the podcast because they were doing it lock and step as the film production was happening. So it's a really fascinating look at both mediums.
My friend Josh Rubens, fantastic, did a great film and, really opened himself up for this, and I really commend them for it. It's just really... really interesting. So, highly recommend that. And so, for my second Tossi's take, it's actually going to be our first kind of negative one.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And that is Godzilla vs. King Kong. I can't recommend it. It just did not work for me. I want these movies to be successful. I get so excited every time they come out. And I've just been disappointed by most of them. Visually, I hate it. King of the Monsters. But I did love Skull Island a lot. I really enjoyed that movie. But this one I was really pumped for. And I think visually it was way better than the other Godzilla films myself. But the end, the script and some of, it just wasn't great. And that's important to me. I care about the human end of it. And I want that story part of it. So that just fell flat to me and then just took me out of the film. I know that's not what everybody goes for. Some people just want to see those guys, going at it, and that's cool, but just didn't work for me. But if I'm going to do a negative take, I always want to give a positive or a different recommendation. And with that, what I would recommend, instead of watching Godzilla versus King Kong, would be watch 2010 Gareth Edwards' Monsters.
Heck yeah.
Just a really great film about, gigantic monsters that take over, Earth, but they're kind of the secondary character in the film. And it's about, the human aspect of it and dealing with it, and it's just so good. Gareth Edwards, I know he did the original Godzilla, and it just didn't work for me, but he's done one of the best Star Wars films in Rogue One. 2010's Monsters, one of a really underrated film.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the best way of understanding monsters is this. If when you're watching Godzilla versus Kong and you're following what the heroes are doing, this is what the actual citizens are doing in Monsters.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes it so compelling, because like you said, it's much more, it's such a deeper focus on the human element. And I always find like interesting with you with like action films or like sci-fi films, like I always look at it like this. You really liked Ang Lee's Hulk, and it's because you love origin story and you love the slow build up. You only need one scene where he's Hulk and you're fine. So that's why I think something like Godzilla versus Kong, like those fight scenes were pretty cool, but at that there was nothing else going on. So the problem is if you're someone who's more invested in the human element and you're like, man, I want to see one cool fight scene, then Godzilla versus King Kong's just not gonna work.
Yeah, that slow burn, I like it. Yeah,
you really do.
It's funny you said that about the Ang Lee Hulk, because I really almost said that myself.
Really? Yeah.
And used that comparison, so I appreciate that.
I always like think about that with you when we talk about like any type of like big kind of like sci-fi epics. I always feel like that's where I know if you're gonna like it or not, is it's got to be something that like earns that fight sequence, or else you're not going to be invested. And honestly, I'm pretty similarly minded, so I completely understand that. My Tossi's takes is going to be a little different, so a little off our normal. So 2 weekends ago, the Greater Lehigh Valley Filmmaker Festival happened. This is put on by Arts Quest and Frank Banco Alehouse Cinemas. So my Tossi take is this. Go to the Frank Banco Alehouse Cinemas page and check out the programming from that weekend. And a huge, phenomenal, big hug, high five shout out to Anthony DeSanctis, because he put an amazing festival together. I can imagine that any of us would immediately understand that putting a filmmaker festival, especially in a local circuit level, is incredibly difficult. Getting people invested, getting content, getting the word out, that's a grind. And then he did it in a pandemic year, and he brought back previous winners from the Greater Lehigh Valley Filmmaker Festival. He did an amazing conversation with Daniel Roebuck. He did this awesome, and actually I got to be a part of this piece, local filmmaker from Emmaus, Pennsylvania. She now lives in New Mexico by the name of Stephanie Gardner, is making this awesome project where she is documenting the lives of 33 filmmakers from 33 different countries who are all 33 years old. And it's called 33andMe. And you're going to be hearing, I think, a lot about this project upcoming, because hopefully someone really, really big buys it, because it's super cool. And he put together this thing where essentially on the panel, she was coming into the Zoom from Macedonia. There was a director coming in from Zimbabwe. There's a director coming in from Turkey. And like Anthony made that happen. And it's such an incredible thing that he does, I think, to support local arts, to support this community, and to remind people like there's really, really cool stuff happening in Lehigh Valley with film. And he's been such an incredible supporter and proponent of, I think, that occurring. And he always does such a phenomenal job. But this year especially, because I think if he had said, I'm not doing it this year, people would have understood, because just the nature of everything, of life right now. But he still did it, and I think it's way cool. So go to Frank Banco Alehouse Cinemas Facebook page. Check out those videos. Check out those panels. You won't be disappointed that you did.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll just add to it, or, because you said it beautifully and perfectly, because it is amazing what he did, and there is so much great content there, and being during a pandemic, the big positive to it being virtual is that stuff is now out there for people still to see.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that's a really great positive that people now can go view it at any point.
No, you're exactly right. Like the fact that people still have access to those resources is like
terrific.
It's a silver lining to find with that. So now, moving from local film and big budget sci-fi film to the niche, artsy, often depressing, it's Oscar season. So how we thought...
Who doesn't want to stand around and watch a bunch of millionaires get a gold statue during a recession?
I mean... I know I do. So how we thought we would handle and tackle this. So obviously, if you've met me, know me, have talked to me for 3 minutes, you probably know that I have a deep affinity for the Oscars. And what we wanted to do with this episode was to talk a little Oscars history, both our own personal histories with the Oscars, and then our like kind of Oscars history in general for any of you who are listening, who maybe you're like, yeah, I hear you talking about the Oscars, Lauren, but I don't really know how this whole thing got started and why you're so excited about it. And then we are going to have a little fun with times that Oscars got it right and times that Oscars got it wrong. Are you ready for this journey with me?
I'm ready for the journey.
Okay.
I feel like I'm excited just to follow you on this one.
So
as most of my friends from high school will know, Lauren is going to be the most prepared student here, and I'm going to be the student that's riding the coattails.
I have so many notes. And trust me, I think given the reins to do so, this would be like a 4-hour lecture series on all the reasons and the deep history of the Oscars. But we'll condense it down. We'll show some uncharacteristic restraint.
No, we won't.
No, we won't. But Ryan, I actually want to start with you because, you're obviously deep in this Oscars game like I am now. So I want to know, what is your Oscars history? When did you start watching, paying attention? Do you got any fun Oscars memories?
Took the red pill with you, and I went down the rabbit hole. My history is not going to be as big as yours, that's for sure. As much as I've talked on this show about the fact that I love film since I could remember anything else, 3 to 4 years old, watching movies and loving them, I never really got into the Oscars through the years. And I won't lie, probably when I started even really paying attention to some of the winners wasn't until probably, I think it was around the Schindler's List, when Schindler's List won that year.
Okay.
And it was Tom Hanks for Philadelphia. That's when that stuff, I think...
That was mid-90s.
Yeah, mid-90s. Yeah. It was the 66th Oscars. So,
okay.
That was when I first started kind of paying attention who a couple people were winning. But that was about the extent of it. And that's kind of how it went for a few years after that. And then I got a little more ears perked up once I had, was in my 20s, right around the year Denzel won and Halle Berry won. But still hadn't watched really the show, just kind of glancing in. And then finally, the first Oscars I ever watched, 2003's Oscars, so that would have been for the 2002 films.
Yeah.
And you're gonna laugh on how I ended up watching this. So I was home alone, and I put on the Oscars, and I knew that "Lose Yourself" by Eminem was nominated for an Oscar, and so the musical guests were playing on the show, and I went, Eminem's gonna play on the Oscars. I have to see what this looks like. So I started watching the show, and I'm watching the whole show.
I know you didn't just call the Oscars an episode.
Sorry. Are you going to tell that story later?
Yes,
then?
I am.
Okay, yeah. So the best part about this is anybody that has Oscar history, and you already know where this is going, I tuned in to watch Eminem sing "Lose Yourself" on the Oscars.
You sure did.
Get through the entire broadcast to find out he's never showing up.
Oh.
Never came on. But it was fun. I enjoyed it. That was the year Steve Martin was host. Love Steve Martin. He was fantastic.
Classic host, yeah.
You had that classic moment of Bowling for Columbine 1. Michael Moore gets up, goes right into a very political speech, gets booed and left off stage, and you have Steve Martin come back and gives the great, one-liner off the cuff of, I just saw Michael Moore getting put into his limo by the Teamsters.
Yeah. No, they said, I just saw Michael Moore getting helped into the trunk by the Teamsters.
Yes.
So nicely or something like that, yeah.
But I really enjoyed that night. Enjoyed that show. So, and then the next year, you and I got, started hanging out, and you got me to watch the show. Yeah. And I haven't stopped watching since.
Under pain of death, you will watch the Oscars every year. So I'm going to come back to that moment of our first Oscars viewing together, which was in 2004, which is the year Mystic River won.
Yeah, I got some thoughts about that.
I know you do.
But I also want to say, with all seriousness, because I know we'll talk about this, I'm kind of giving you the quick how I got into watching, because I really didn't have this long history before you and I were together. Now, I absolutely look forward to it. Like, to me, it is bigger than the Super Bowl in our household. Like, it is. Yeah. Like, I just genuinely, I love watching all the movies, because it's really, over the years now, has opened up to see a lot of films that in the past I may have just not watched, because, just didn't pique my interest. That trailer didn't grab me or whatever, but I got opened up to a lot more variety of film, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I just enjoy it. I love how excited you get, and yeah, so it's not like I'm watching it, like, because you make me. I absolutely cannot wait every year to watch it.
No.
Even if sometimes I'm a little more snarky about it than you.
Just sometimes you are, and I have a real problem. We will get to my own personal Oscars history and my kind of like how I am with the Oscars. So, you start watching because of Lose Yourself playing at the Oscars, which I need 45 minutes to unpack that after the episode, because I did not know.
An Oscar-winning song, excuse me.
Sure is. But so it's really interesting to think about, because if you think about like the Oscars now as it exists, and whether or not you're someone who's listening to us who watches the Oscars, you're probably at least somewhat aware that they're occurring every year, because you see the advertisements for it, you hear people talking about it, it tends to be on the news. There tends to be specials about it. You'll see videos pop up about like, kind of like what we're going to talk about, Oscars getting it right, Oscars getting it wrong. And because it has become like such an important part of how we mark years in filmmaking. And that is, so if we think about Oscars now, it's really interesting to think about Oscars at its origin. And what I've always found really fascinating is the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, begins in the 1920s, and this part of it I don't like, really honestly, to like mitigate labor disputes, because the studios didn't want like actors and technicians to unionize. Listen, we have to deal with what it is. Like, we have to be...
Well, at least they are now void of all controversies.
They cleared all that up. All right, a pause for a second, because I do want to address that. I love the Oscars unabashedly, and I'll go into the reasons as like what my personal history is. However, I am not someone who is unwilling to kill their darlings, and I'm not walking some primrose path. There are some deep problems with the Academy. Some problems that this year's nominees, as we'll talk next week, are hopefully starting to alleviate, but that is a road that took way too long to get there.
Yeah.
So I am going to be the first to be very critical of representation in the Academy voting body, the types of films that are nominated, that groups that have been largely ignored, marginalized, or silenced by the Academy. There are a lot of issues there. And I say this because if you're going to hear me gleefully talk about it, please understand I am not someone who does that with blinders on. I am very, very aware. But I hope to explain why I still look at it as a very hopeful thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we live in a world where, we are happily forced to kind of have introspective on the things that we enjoy and see the flaws in them.
Yeah.
And hope to improve upon them.
Because it's important to be reflective. So I just wanted to say that before, because like even at the Oscars inception, the fact that like the reality is that Douglas Fairbanks went, wait, they're unionizing? This is going to really screw up production. So... essentially they create this...
They just give him an award? Is that what the thought?
No, so here's what happened.
Blue ribbon?
So here's what happened. So you have this group of like, kind of the original Academy, and the voting bodies essentially were going to be, actors, producers, directors, and technicians. So it started out as a way for, so even before the awards come to be, they wanted to, aside from the labor disputes thing, that is a little bit more of the sinister edge of this, but they also believed that filmmaking needed to be appreciated as an art form, because if you are someone who loves film, there have been peaks and valleys in time and history where we've not looked at film as like our highest art form. So the idea is that to create kind of an appreciation, a preservation, particularly if you know anything about like films that were lost because they were filmed on nitrate and were not stored properly, like there was essentially, you know, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, or, you know, AMPAS for short, was created to kind of take care of those concerns. So, you know, kind of the celebration, the preservation of film. And they thought that a way to kind of celebrate film would be to have an awards ceremony that would, you know, designate the films that were of artistic achievement for that particular year. And the notion behind it was that awards would do a few different things. One, obviously, it promotes the cinematic industry. Two, it takes time to kind of like celebrate the film. And three, it creates like a standard for, you know, as Scorsese would call the difference between a movie and a film. So I'm saying that very snarky. So the year is 1929. So on May 16th, 1929, and if you're like, wait a second, the Oscars are normally in February. Yes, they normally are in February now, but that wasn't always the case. So May 16th, 1929, the Oscars held its first ever Oscar ceremony, the Academy Awards, and it was held at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel, which you and I have been to, because the first time we went to California, I made him do a walking tour, essentially, of anything Oscars related.
Had a delicious burger there.
Yeah, it was really good. The place was tight. It lasted 15 minutes. It was hosted by then President Douglas Fairbanks. The winners knew 3 months in advance of the ceremony.
I didn't know that part. That's interesting.
That they had won, because the winners used to be told in advance, and then they decided not to do that anymore, and I'll get to that in a second.
They just wanted to see people their dreams crushed.
Come on. It's more fun that way.
Right.
There were 270 people in attendance. It was held at the Blossom of the Hollywood Roosevelt, and it cost $5 for a ticket to the Oscars that year, but only 270 people went. That year, you know, Wings wins. It's our first Best Picture. You and I actually, so this is a cool thing. We watched Wings at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel while we were having that delicious burger that you're speaking about. That year, Janet Gaynor won Best Actress, so she's the first Best Actress, and she actually won that award for 3 films simultaneously: Sunrise, Seventh Heaven, and Street Angel, because that's how it was awarded at the time, was that she had 3 films that had come out. Now, this was encompassing, I think, from 1927 to 1929. The voting period was much longer. And I'd love to say the rest is history, but there's like more to it than that, you know, because how do we get from a 15-minute ceremony where the winners knew 3 months in advance to what we have now? And a lot of that comes from the tradition of it and the prestige of it, you know, kind of like anything had to gain momentum over time. You know, the Super Bowl was not really the Super Bowl until it was the Super Bowl, you know.
The halftime show used to be like a marching band.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, so the spectacle...
Now we have the weekend.
Yeah. So the spectacle, you know, grows over time, but it coinciding with that is the obviously the importance and the significance of winning one of these awards. You know, there's a lot of like, you know, kind of famous theories, like who is the Oscar named after. I always love the theory that it's named after Margaret Herrick. So she's the Oscars librarian.
Oh, okay.
It was named actually after her uncle. I always like that version of the story best, only because I like Margaret Herrick, and she's like such an icon of like what she did to like preserve like early film history, and seeing the importance of that. So it starts to kind of like gain this momentum. If people understand that this award starts to become important, because now all of a sudden you can put this thing on your poster, you can advertise your film. It's an Oscar-winning film. It's an Oscar-winning Best Picture. And, you know, and this really starts to show so 1936, and this ends up being a rule change. Hal Moore, who was a cinematographer for the version of A Midsummer Night's Dream that came out that year, actually won by write-in vote, because you actually used to be able to write in people. They change it like 2 years after this, because he actually ends up winning based on write-in, because he campaigned for people to write him in as the best cinematographer, even though he wasn't nominated. But he ends up winning.
At least we got away from the writing, or the campaigning, I mean.
Yeah, but that's where the tradition of campaigning starts. And then things really turn on its head, because in 1953, they decide to televise it for the first time. And that really changes the culture of Oscar. Now, at this point, Oscar already has its reputation. Things that have changed is because They used to give the names of the winners to the newspapers in advance, like the night before, so that way they could print them. Because if you're thinking about putting it out on like typeface, they stopped doing that because the LA Times accidentally printed the results early and ruined the surprise.
Jeez.
Claudette Colbert very famously did not believe she was going to win, so she was boarding a train to go to New York City for a production, and they wired the train station that she had won an Academy Award. They got her a cab. They held the train full of people going to New York City so Claudette Colbert could go back to and I don't know what auditorium it was in that year, but could go back, accept her Oscar in her like train suit that she's wearing to travel, and then they put her back on the train to go to New York.
Wow.
Yeah. It's also interesting because that year, so that's a Frank Capra film. He was nominated the year before. So that year, the Oscars were hosted at the Coconut Grove. If you know anything about like Hollywood history, the Coconut Grove was one of those like, places to be. And when Will Rogers came on stage to give out the Best Directing Award, he started talking about this young, spirited filmmaker who was about to win the award. So the presenter actually gave a little speech about the winner instead of just saying the nominees and then doing and the Oscar goes to. So he gave this little speech and he said, "Frank, get up here." So Frank Capra got up because he believed he had won for his film Lady for a Day. He hadn't. It was actually a gentleman by the name of Frank Lloyd who had won for Cavalcade that year. Geez. And the only reason Frank Capra knew was because the spotlight wasn't on him as he was walking up to the stage. And now, happily, that ends up not being recorded. So, because again, this isn't 1953 is when we first.
I'm just imagining Zoolander.
Yeah, 100%. I'm sure Frank Capra's really thrilled that that's what you're picturing right now. But so that first televised.
Did Capra ever win one?
He won 3 times. So Frank Capra wins 3 times, and not in successive years, but pretty close after each other. One of them was for It Happened One Night. And he, so it's interesting to see then kind of the shift, because now people are paying attention to it. More people have televisions in their home. This is something, it becomes kind of event television, which is, not something that I think is as prevalent in our kind of society of streaming as it once was, but so it comes event television. It's hosted by or co-hosted by Frederick March and Bob Hope. And then this is kind of the interesting part. So the first Oscars televised ceremony was actually bi-coastal. Half of the ceremony was happening in New York and half of the ceremony was happening in Los Angeles.
Oh, interesting.
And this is interesting to me because of the fact of what we're going to be experiencing this year with kind of an altered version of the ceremony.
Right.
So,
we kind of got that with the Golden Globes.
Yes.
Although the Golden Globes, everybody was on Zoom, so nobody was really in person from the nominee standpoint.
Exactly. And honestly, it's one of those things, I've seen clips from it. I'd love to try and find a full broadcast of it to watch it from beginning to end. Obviously,
Question, did Eminem show up that night?
Yes, Ryan.
Gotcha.
So let's sit down and watch that tonight, and I promise you Eminem's going to show up.
Right.
Don't tell him. So it's interesting, so we think about the origins of Oscar and how it comes to be this kind of massive thing. There's so many special things, and I could rattle off fun facts about past Oscar ceremony, and we've already talked about this. If we are lucky enough that this podcast keeps going, there will always be an Oscars episode every year, and it'll probably always be one episode that's a little bit of history and then one episode that's about the current year.
Yeah.
But there are so many things that are interesting and special kind of about this award ceremony, special moments and circumstances that happen. There are only 3 films that have ever had 14 nominations. Do you know the 3 films?
14 nominations?
Yep.
I guess would be Fellowship of the Ring?
No.
Oh,
that's a good guess, though.
Okay. No. That's it. I'm out.
So it's Titanic.
Okay, that makes sense.
All About Eve.
Silence of the Lambs?
No, La La Land.
Oh, wow. Okay.
However, Silence of the Lambs is coming up in my next fun fact.
Yeah, I was going to, okay.
There are only 5 films that have done 3 films that have done the 5 major category sweep. So one of them is
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs. It Happened One Night. Do you know the last one? I'll give you a hint, Jack Nicholson.
Oh, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
It is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I don't know why. I was very surprised to see that. And so we're talking about the 5 sweeps.
Yeah, because I think that's a film that doesn't get, I mean, it's such. I mean, everybody talks about it. It's obviously classic, but I feel like that it gets kind of not talked in the Oscar Academy Award conversation.
I 100% agree. Like, and it's one of those like. I love the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I love the film. And this is something that did that. So the magical thing we're talking about here is best director, best actor, best actress, best screenplay, best picture.
Yeah.
Not easy to do.
Has anybody ever done a full sweep, including the supporting?
No.
Okay.
No, and I was looking for, I was kind of curious.
And I don't think, I have a feeling that will never happen.
I don't think so either.
Because I feel like love kind of gets put out around, like, sometimes now with that type of stuff. So it would have to be something really undeniable.
Super, super special. There only have ever been 6 ties in Academy history. I'm always hoping for a tie because I think that's a special moment.
Yeah, I don't think you and I've ever seen one.
No. They all predate even like when I watch the Oscars. Do you know who is the person who has had the most nominations and the most wins in Academy history?
No.
Walt Disney.
Oh.
Walt Disney, he has the most wins with 10 in 8 straight years.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
The legend.
Yeah, and that's actually not Walt Disney film, like Walt Disney himself.
I mean, I know there's a lot of classic pictures of him with holding, like, just tons of Oscars.
Yeah.
So.
Which is a baller move.
Oh, yeah.
If you can be holding that many Oscars at once.
Did we see one of the Oscars?
We did.
Okay, I thought so. Okay.
Yeah. You and I have seen 3 real Oscars. One of Walt's, one of Frank Sinatra's.
Was that in Las Vegas?
It was in Las Vegas at the Wynn. You want to do the Stephen Wynn voice now, don't you? And then the third was actually at the Dolby Theater.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm going to use that as the transition to talk about Lauren's personal Oscar history. So back in 2013, we took a trip out to California because I grew up in the 90s and, Southern California.
What's a trip?
Oh, okay, so vacation. So sometimes you go on this thing. It's called an aeroplane.
Does that result in leaving?
It leaves. You have to leave the house and be amongst people. So we took a trip in 2013, and we were going to California for the first time, and of course, because we were going to Los Angeles, we wanted to see a lot of movie stuff. It resulted in probably one of my favorite travel memories. It's definitely up there. If I had to make a list, it'd be probably in the number 2 spot very easily. And we went on a tour of the Dolby Theater. The Dolby Theater is where it used to be called the Kodak Theater. It's where the Oscar ceremony happens every year for now a number of years. Although certainly, there are other theaters that have obviously we talked about the Hollywood Roosevelt, Coconut Grove, the Pantages.
And then we'll be taking a break from it this year under the circumstances.
No, it's actually going to be in 2 spots at the same time.
I thought it was like an airport hangar or something.
It's at the Dolby Theater, and it's at the Union Station in Los Angeles. Sorry. So downtown LA. So we went on this tour. The tour guide either really loved me or really loathed me because I was like, everything he said, I hung on every word. We got to see, so essentially they took us to like where the green room was. That's actually where we got to see a real Oscar. And then we were like just kind of walking. I didn't know this happened, and we're walking backstage, and I was walking backwards because I was talking to the tour guide. And if you're thinking, wow, Lauren, just when I think you can't get extra. Oh yeah, guys, I was in my element. Like this guy was like talking about Oscars history and how he gets to attend and what it looks like in the month leading up to, which is fascinating within itself. I could do a whole episode about the procedures for the Dolby Theater the month before the Oscars occur. And I was walking backwards and I turned around and I happened to find myself standing in the spot where people accept their Academy Awards on the stage at the Dolby Theater. And I could cry now just thinking about how special that moment is.
It was cool. It was a cool moment because I was a little ahead of you and I saw it. Like I knew it. Like I knew what was coming and I could see that you still had not realized it. So it was fun to see it in real time of you just turning and it was weird because it was like all of a sudden we were just there. Like we didn't know and then like all of a sudden we were on stage. But your reaction was just priceless. I mean, everything, you want out of somebody who loves something and then they get to see it to some degree and experience it in real life is exactly what you did that night. Like, it was awesome.
And it was, so if you're...
And there is a noise that came out of you that's still hanging over the Dolby Theater somewhere. Like,
I will try to replicate it. So, you know, part of this is like in trying to understand. So if you're like, why are you so obsessed with this? And it's because this, I think, like, what it comes down to, I just hit my notebook because I'm so excited.
This desk can't take it.
This desk can't take it much more. You know, part of it is that, and it's a credit, I'll give, you know, complete credit to my parents here, because one thing they certainly did not do with my brother and I is they didn't pander to us when it came to movies. Like, they, you know, they both felt like, no, you should be watching these films at a very early age. And, you know, and I know everyone's got their own feelings about ratings, but my parents never, like, talked down to us about film. They, you know, especially my dad, he wanted us to have an appreciation. I mean, he wanted us to have an appreciation of a lot of things, like really the History Channel, number one, and then like the New York Times, and then film. But, you know, they let us see a lot of like really important classic cinema like very early. And I watched Turner Classic Movies like round the clock when I was a kid. And the Oscars to me, and what they still mean to me to this day, is this. Like, film to me is the most important way in which we connect as human beings. And I know for everyone, for some people it's sport and being a part of that fandom, you know, or being a part of a team. But for me, it's film, because it's the thing that communicates what stories we need to tell in a given year. And whether it's an independent film or a big blockbuster, to me, they're all valuable in that they communicate human experience. And we take one night a year to set aside and say, you know, for all the pomp and circumstance, what we're actually celebrating is the human stories of a year. And some years that really represents the experience, and some years it doesn't. But either way, the thing I've always appreciated about it is kind of the act of hope that happens when we stop to say we can take a night to appreciate art and to celebrate film. And that's what it's always meant to me. I've always felt that deeply about it. I'm a crazy person about watching it. Like, I watch it in silence. You can ask any of my family members, like, what I was like even as a kid. I had very specific requests. I had to have Martinelli sparkling cider, a pack of potato skins. I'm not even kidding. This is an actual thing. I would watch coverage starting at, like, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I still do.
You still do.
And I wanted silence when the ceremony was on, because I wanted to take in my saddest Oscars moment was the year that Julia Roberts won for Erin Brockovich. I grew up, Julia Roberts was my favorite actress when I was growing up because, you know, hearty diet of Mystic Pizza and, you know, Pretty Woman.
That toothy girl from Mystic Pizza.
Best Ron Swanson line ever. But I honestly just, I wanted to see that moment so bad, and I'd had a spinal fusion, and I was still very much recovering from that, and I fell asleep during her acceptance speech, and I was devastated. Like,
and it's not like nowadays you can just jump on YouTube. It's already there.
Fun fact you don't know, I wrote to ABC. I'm not kidding. I wrote to ABC and I tried to explain myself because I was so devastated. And now
Michael Eisner didn't write you back?
I've now seen it 1,000 times over. Her dress was perfection that night. Like, that vintage Valentino. It's one of the most iconic Oscars looks of all time. But I mean, that's honestly just how deeply I feel it. And then, you know, when we started dating, we decided to watch the Oscars together, and my family honestly was shocked.
I invited you over. Hey, Lauren, we were just hanging out as friends at that time, you know. I mean, obviously, we had an affection for each other, but, like, I invited you over to watch the Oscars. Had no idea your, you know, fandom for it.
You had no idea I was a rank psychopath about it. That's honestly, and that's truly, you can kind of point to that, like, I think anyone in my family would say, how do we know she liked Ryan? She went and watched the Oscars at his house, and you were not silent during the Oscars.
No. I invited other people over. We were all just joking around and talking.
And I had to sit there and think, I don't understand why these people won't shut up during the Oscars.
Thanks for staying with me.
Yeah, of course. It started our Oscars bet. That's a very special night in my mind. Like, but we
had soft pretzels before you came out early. We went and got soft pretzels at a restaurant by us, and then had
Kutztown Tavern.
Soft pretzels on Oscar Sunday ever since.
Yeah. You don't give me a DVD copy of My First Mister, though, every Oscar Sunday. So we've broken from that tradition from the first one. But it's
you just get somehow swindled a swag bag every year.
Please don't put my swag bag on black. Yeah, guys. I mean, listen. If you text Ryan, he needs support during this time of year because I am. We watch every single movie. We make a very big deal about it. I wear very specific, like, Hollywood-inspired outfits the entire week leading up to work. I have a countdown on my board.
I like how you say that, like you don't do that almost every week.
Accurate.
But
accurate. I do like a theme
the movie
dress
thing
up.
has been fun, though, over the years. Like, because you don't... I mean, this year's obviously much different, but in years past, like, you find out about mid-January, and then the Oscar broadcast is going to be sometime in February, and it's like... Which of these movies, you know, the nominations come out, and then it's like, we quick make a list of which of the films we haven't seen in all of the major categories. No offense to all the other subcategories that are all just as important to filmmaking. Just, we look for the, you know, kind of the big ones that you talked about, and we try to knock all of those out as much as we can. And over the last few years, we've been lucky enough to get around. And this is the beauty of art house cinemas and everything, where we can see these films. This year, obviously, much easier because of most of the films are already on.
And a lot of years we get to watch the shorts, like, if we're really on it. But, you know, like, what is it? Like, 65% of Best Picture nominees are released in November and December. So, like, you do start to have a sense of it. And then, you know, the magical night happens and we get to see who wins and who loses. And I think that brings us to our next segment, which is... Let's talk about when Oscars got it wrong, although it pains me to say the Oscars got it wrong. But let's talk about what are some of your big Oscars got it wrong.
Well, I mean, we could sit here and go through every year and go by the awards, right? Like, and go, they didn't... Here's the funny thing with that, and I'm not saying I certainly have my opinions on that, you have your opinions on it. I mean, that's kind of the fun of it. Art is so subjective, and when you're just handpicking what's going to be the best, there's not a clear-cut winner, no matter how we all slice it. We feel it in our hearts and our bones, and we are going to argue it to no end.
Yeah, what Lauren says should win.
But in the end, it's subjective, so it's like, it's hard. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be films that we talk about that we're going to sit there and say, no, they just got it wrong. But I kind of went away from that a little bit in thinking about this, because to me... Some of the big things that they got wrong, the first one, I'm going to go with, I'm going to actually go back and say an award, but the 2020, last year's Oscars, I'm already going back there. Lupita Nyong'o, completely robbed for Us.
1,000%.
Not just nominated. Yeah. Should have won.
1,000%.
And this is, we are two people that loved Renee Zellweger as Judy and Judy Garland. But no, Lupita Nyong'o in Us was just phenomenal. And
because the thing is that, like, Renee Zellweger's performance is really great, and it's not a knock on it, but, like, what Lupita Nyong'o does in Us is transformative, and it's a performance.
She is two different characters that are the same character, which is just crazy on its own. She just is the life of that film, and that film is fantastic. So that, to me, right off the bat, I gotta say, to me, that has bothered me since last year, that she didn't get a nomination, but I would even argue won. Like, once she didn't get nominated, I was rooting for Renee Zellweger, but that also kind of goes into my other issue here. Horror.
Yeah.
Only 6 films have ever been nominated for Best Picture in the horror genre, and I'm going to argue that some of them you could even say are horror adjacent, because Silence of the Lambs is terrific.
It's a thriller.
And it's more thriller. Sixth Sense could even be argued in there.
I'd say it's solid horror.
It's probably horror. So the 6 are going to be Silence of the Lambs, The Exorcist, Jaws, Sixth Sense, Get Out, and they actually count Black Swan in there.
Oh, that's not a horror movie.
So,
I mean, it is, but it isn't. But it is.
So it's just, you're missing out on The Shining, Alien, Psycho, Us, which I think should be in there.
100%.
Even Hereditary, I think,
Midsommar.
And this year, I'm going to argue and say The Invisible Man should have been in the discussion.
Oh my gosh, that movie is so beautifully directed.
So that's an issue I have with the Oscars. So
that's
I think
that's
that
a
they
good
got it
one.
wrong.
Honestly, that's a really that's a good Oscars getting it wrong.
Now, do you want to go back and forth, or do you want me to just give my 3?
Let's go back and forth.
Okay.
Let's do that. So my number 3 spot, so we did a top 3. My number 3 spot is, and I will tell you, all of mine are related to awards.
Okay. All right.
So my number 3 is The Best Years of Our Lives beating out It's a Wonderful Life. For Best Picture. So here's the thing. I love The Best Years of Our Lives. I saw it in a history classroom when I was at high school. It is a brilliant film, and it is a bold film because it was talking about PTSD before any film was willing to talk about it. However, that being said, It's a Wonderful Life is an undeniable classic. I do think it's a better made film. I also think knowing the history of Jimmy Stewart and what he was battling with and how he used that film to deal with his PTSD or to try and cope with his PTSD, I think adds an interesting layer. But It's a Wonderful Life is such an incredible classic. And it's like, you could say, like, yes, it certainly transcends the fact that it didn't win Best Picture, but it should have won Best Picture that year. And I love The Best Years of Our Lives.
Best Years of Our Life, it won like 9 Oscars, right?
Yes.
So it was a darling that year, and at least is still in the conversation, right?
100%. I'm not saying most egregious.
But I agree with you. There's no arguing there.
How about you?
Okay. So now going to probably my first Oscars that I watched, and gonna get a little charged and a little heated here. 2003 Oscars. What got wrong was the entire Hollywood elite with giving Roman fucking Polanski.
Oh, there it is, guys. There's where the word came in.
A fucking standing ovation for winning an Oscar. Yeah. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Kidding me. I would argue he shouldn't have even won the Oscar that year.
No,
because you had
not.
Scorsese up for Gangs of New York. But the fact that he still won the Oscar and they gave him a standing ovation, or you just...
I'm sorry, I can't play shocked here because they award Woody Allen so many nominations, so what am I supposed to play shocked at?
I mean, I'm not saying, like, we can...
No, fair, I'm being cheeky.
This is literally a convicted rapist. I mean, and, I mean, I know they tried... I mean, many of them had signed a petition for him to be back into the country not long before this, and then to do that, oh my God, and talk about something that doesn't hold up well, especially now... Christ.
It didn't hold up well then either. And, like, the problem is that, like, you know, and so much of, like, the Hollywood machine and the Hollywood toxicity, like, in the 90s and early 2000s, I mean, like, listen, the history of Hollywood and the toxicity and so much of, like, what has occurred, like, you're right, it's an incredibly egregious thing because it's, like, you know, we talk about how things age and how we perceive situations differently, how we grow and change as human beings and evaluate things differently. But that's not a situation where we grew and changed as human beings. Like, no, he was convicted of a crime.
Right.
And we stood up and applauded when he won. Not me.
Kevin Smith very notably had said, listen, I love Rosemary's Baby as much as anybody, but rape is still rape. Like, this is, you know, you're not talking about some of the young Hollywood elite. These were, like, quintessential top people that were in the front. Meryl Streep, a bunch of them just.
Yeah. It'll make your stomach turn because I think the problem is that...
Like, I know this is supposed to be a little bit more on the fun end of, like, what awards were wrong? But I could not just let that go. That had to be talked about.
So I feel bad about mine because I feel like I went real light fluff.
No, let's go back to the light fluff. I apologize for my language.
No, listen.
But there was no way I could talk about that without...
No apologies necessary. I mean, maybe somebody in the podcast audience wants you to apologize. But here's why I'll say that. Because, like, the hypocrisy at how... toxic the Hollywood environment is towards people that are put on pedestals. I mean, obviously, in the past few years, incredibly apparent. But at that, I also think it's you know, a symptom of exactly what so many of the problems have been. Like, kind of that status, that elite, that white male privilege that occurs in Hollywood throughout most of its history it's what leads to situations like that, where there are people who could be pretty flippant about it. And I've read articles of people talking about who are defending him and saying, like, well, his victim came out and forgave him, and it's like, no, that does not matter.
But even at that's not as cut and dry as some people. But she wanted to move on, is what that essentially came down to.
But you'll see people cite that in articles, and it's really insane to me because, like, you'll see them cite, like, oh, she forgave him, like, so flippantly, and then you click on the article and it's like, whoa, that's not what happened. Right. She didn't forgive. You're exactly right. It's like a moving on.
Yeah, and my aggressiveness wasn't towards you. That was just that like, I get it. Like, yeah, I love watching this show, but it's like sometimes it's a little tone deaf on certain things.
It's sometimes a lot of tone deaf on things.
And then also, quite notably in that video, is Harvey Weinstein up there standing ovation. So,
well, of course, he probably endorsed, like, you know, and that's, oh gosh.
So can we take us out of this seriousness?
Because my next one's going to seem real thin.
Most people probably right now are happy for us to move on.
So my number 2, and again, like, mine are all related to awards. Shakespeare in Love winning over Saving Private Ryan.
No,
I have such a clear memory of seeing Saving Private Ryan in the theaters, and crying, and, like, look, I saw it with my dad, and I think that's, like, a pretty, you know, prototypical way to see that kind of war film, is like with a father. But I remember seeing that film. I remember, even at my young age, knowing how important that film was, how impactful that opening was. And that opening is not easy sauce to watch. And the thing is the rest of the film is not without its grit. It's not like he pulls back after that first 15. Like, it's a tough war film in that way. And it's an incredible film and was such an achievement. And Shakespeare in Love is such a bastardization of Shakespeare's life. I hate it so much. I don't like when people play flippant with what they think Shakespeare's life was. Honestly, it's something that really, it grinds my gears. And it's not an English teacher thing. It's just a Shakespeare thing. It's like when people are like, he didn't write all of them. Like, I get real salty with stuff like that. And I do not like Shakespeare in Love. I think that movie is it's an abomination.
What about Ben Affleck in it? Were you appreciative?
Well, but the problem is Ben Affleck in the 90s. Everyone appreciates Ben Affleck in the 90s.
I had that was on my short list of possibilities on this. Yeah,
I thought it might be, because I knew you would probably say that one. All right, so what's your number 2?
Well, my number 1 was Lupita Nyong'o. My number 2 was Polanski.
I'm sorry, I got lost in the Polanski. Yeah. All right, so what's your number 3?
My number 1, top 1, they're not really in order, obviously. It's the entire 1999 Oscars.
Oh, yeah, it's a weird year.
So it happened in, 2020, or I'm sorry, 2000. And this is going to be a hot take. People love this movie. But American Beauty cleaning up at that Oscars, to me, it is one of my least favorite films. I do not understand the appeal. I have watched it now a couple of times, hoping to maybe see a different angle of it, different period and times in my life. You and I watched it together not long ago.
Oh, well, because I consider that a big, like, almost like a how could you for me, because of it being a Best Picture winner and because of it being something that's, like, so massively iconic. And I was none too pleased by the time we finished that movie.
Yeah, and it's not like you're talking about a bad year. Like, I went and looked at, like, the year Crash won. And, and the whole Crash, Brokeback Mountain. That's not a great year of film. I think that was 2005. That's just a bad year of film.
But Brokeback should have won.
Yes, in hindsight, yes. I liked Crash at the time. Looking back, no. Brokeback was the more appropriate film to win. But you're talking about 1999, which was just a great year in film. I'm really into it right now because you got me this great book, The Best Year of Film Ever, which I highly recommend. But even the films that were nominated, The Green Mile, The Sixth Sense, would be above, to me, American Beauty. But you're not even talking about that year. Fight Club came out. Magnolia came out. The Matrix came out, and how innovative that was. Mm-hmm. It's just these films. Eyes Wide Shut. I know it's not going to be, super popular, but these are
but you think about, like, Kubrick's last film getting nominated for...
Kubrick doesn't get nominated, which is another egregious thing that Kubrick never won an Oscar, which I could have just done a whole thing about that. So, yeah, I mean, Sam Mendes winning for American Beauty, Best Picture, Kevin Spacey winning Best Actor, and not even talking about the stuff today, but, like, Denzel Washington didn't win for The Hurricane. Like,
ridiculous. Yeah, ridiculous mistake, on the Academy's part.
It's just bad to me, and then the one that actually probably bothers me the most, best adapted screenplay, being John Malkovich. I mean, best original screenplay. Being John Malkovich doesn't beat out American Beauty for best original screenplay.
It doesn't make sense in so many regards because, like, even just, like, first off, like, pound for pound just writing, being John Malkovich is the much better written screenplay.
And you want to talk about, like, I get it. A lot of people have their feelings about Shyamalan now because we look at, but at that time, The Sixth Sense was the biggest movie in the world and it was so well done. So that should have been your winner that year. I don't know.
Yeah, it's honestly, you and I have kind of already talked about this, the idea of like our Oscars podcast in years going forward, like taking 1 year and just focusing on it and like looking at like the dynamics at play. That would be a year to do that because you're talking about films that like innovated and changed Hollywood cinema and are still iconic to this day.
Blair Witch, Election, Boys Don't Cry.
Yeah.
Like, think of that year is just amazing, and you're going to tell me American Beauty was the best film?
It wasn't. No, it 100% wasn't.
I love Thora Birch as much as the next person, but...
Yeah, no, an egregious mistake by the Academy. I do hate that movie won.
Virgin Suicides.
Oh, I love the Virgin
The
Suicides.
Best Man, Iron Giant.
Yeah. Like they threw an Iron Giant there at the end. Yeah. So that takes me to my number one, and I think you know what this is. And I'm going to try to hold back because you've already spent all our curse words before I have to label this as an explicit episode. Green Book winning Best Picture. I'm still not over that. It actually still makes me mad. I get if you want to get me super fired up about something, like if I'm ever sleepy and you need to wake me up, just say Green Book and I will go into full like the Rage Carrie 2 mode, man. It's not pretty when you ask me about Green Book. I hate that movie. It's a weirdly offensive movie in so many ways because they took so many liberties with a true story or a quote unquote based on a true story. It's not, to me, terribly well acted, and I hate saying that because I love Mahershala Ali, and I think he's the one bright spot in that movie, but the problem is like, you can't have one performance and then make a Best Picture out of it. The fact that the director is not even nominated for Best Director, I always find that smells funny when you've got a Best Picture winner and the director wasn't nominated.
Well,
I always find
Ang
that
Lee
weird.
once notably said that he doesn't understand how how you can have a Best Director and the film Best Picture are not the same. Yeah. Now, I don't agree with that completely, but I agree with you. The fact that he wasn't even nominated.
And someone could argue, like, well, you can have 10 Best Picture nominees, but you can only have 5 Best Directors. And it's like, yeah, I get that. And let's be honest, like 5 of those films in the Best Picture, when you have 10 in a year, they're on merit. Like, it's it's nice to be nominated, guys. Yeah. Because it's, as you and I talk about, like the Dark Knight rule. Because the Dark Knight should have been nominated for Best Picture, but there was only 5 Best Picture nominees that year, and then they changed the rule because of the Dark Knight. And then decided, well, we don't want a movie like that to win, even though we've made the rule. So, which can explain, like, why a movie like Us doesn't get nominated. Like, and the problem with Green Book is, like, if nothing else, Roma came out that year, guys. Roma. If you've seen Roma, you know that there's nothing that says that film any year against any film, against most Best Pictures, shouldn't be a Best Picture. You can't tell me differently, but Green Book wins that year. And I hate that movie, and it's ridiculous, and it's it is so poorly directed. It is such a mess of a film. It's poorly directed, it's poorly paced, it's so in love with itself and overly self-important. It dives into that white savior bullshit trope. I cannot stand that movie in the worst kind of way. And if you're listening to this and you're like, but I liked Green Book, I'm sorry, it's a crap movie.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. We were there in a crowded theater watching it, and you and I just looked at each other at the end and went, what? What? I didn't... half the people that in the audience that were laughing at moments, were completely almost offended by a lot of the jokes that were in it. It did. Who is it? Peter Farrelly? I know it's one of the Farrelly brothers.
Peter Farrelly, yeah.
Yeah, and again, like you said, we had A Star Is Born, The Favorite, and Black Panther and Black Klansman all in the same year, and you're gonna take this, and it's not even an original type film, story, excuse me.
No, it's a story that's been stupidly told 50 years ago and should never be told again. Like, it's honestly, it's so devoid of being of its time or relevant, and it's such a repeat on, these, kind of absurdist, like, white savior type stories that have been told previously that, like, I thought we just agreed that we were going to stop doing, but apparently not. Like,
and it's crazy when you think it's bookended by The Shape of Water and Parasite.
Exactly. And to me, it's like, this is how it felt.
Like, what?
It felt like we awarded The Shape of Water, and then everyone, the Hollywood elite, got scared, so we had to give it to Green Book, and then they went, oh, that pissed people off. Parasite. Right. Like, that's honestly, unfortunately, sometimes...
For the record, we both agree that Shape of Water and Parasite absolutely deserved.
Genius, and 100% deserved, but
yeah,
Roma...
that was weird.
And please understand, like, I think if you had awarded it to Black Panther, I think Black Panther was 100% more deserving. Black Klansman, my deep feelings for Black Klansman. I love that film. I 100% will argue that if I'm picking one from that year, it should have been Roma.
Well, you and I wouldn't have any problem. I mean, Alfonso Cuarón to me is one of the all-time best directors, and I think Roma is awesome. I was rooting for The Favorite that year, but I would have been just as equally happy with Roma. I agree with you. Like, it was just...
And I love Yorgos Lanthimos. Like, it's not... And what he did with that film was, like, super, super genius, especially the lighting alone in it. But I think it if I remember correctly, it didn't win for Best Cinematography because Roma did, correct? Am I right in that?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Which it deserved.
And let's... And to transition out of, straight up negativesville, because...
Sometimes it's a little more fun to get into the negatives,
I know, but it makes me uncomfy. I don't like being negative. At least not, like, negative, like, recorded for posterity.
Well, that's true. We'll find out and we can look back on this in hopefully 5 years and see how it's aged.
Green Book, still terrible. But the nice thing about the Oscars is it's been going on for 93 years, and they haven't always gotten it wrong.
About as long as this podcast.
If you're still here, thank you. So moving into, like, some of our favorite moments. And so we each for this made a top 3. And I won't lie, I was having a really hard time doing this because I think, obviously, a lot of energy and excitement around the Oscars, and I have so many. So I have some honorable mentions in typical Ryan Tocci fashion. So I'm going to steal from you a little bit. And I'm going to say there are a few Oscars moments that are really important to me for personal reasons, just for, like, really special memories associated with it. One of those, and these don't crack my top 3, but they're really important all the same. Catherine Bigelow beating out James Cameron for Best Director when he was nominated for Avatar and she was nominated for The Hurt Locker. Because if that ain't Revenge of the X, I don't know what is. That was so boss. And the thing is like, obviously, if you know anything about the history of female directors, she was the first female director to win an Academy Award, so it's, milestone for that. And, she's such an important, force in the cinematic world, and her winning and beating out James Cameron is one of my favorite things ever. After that, Halle Berry winning for Monsters Ball. I would say probably one could argue the best acceptance speech of all time. And certainly there are a lot of fun ones. The Ben Affleck, Matt Damon winning for Good Will Hunting. Roberto Benigni, climbing over the chairs. I know you don't like that win, but it's iconic. Adrian Brody, I still don't know how we're supposed to feel about him kissing Halle Berry.
No.
Probably not good. There are so many, like, iconic acceptance speeches, but hers came from such a space of understanding the historical significance of her win. It came from such a beautiful space. It's something that moved me. I was crying as she was crying, and I was younger when that movie came out. But I remember absolutely loving that performance and then really, really appreciating that she won. Obviously, I've talked about Julia Roberts winning, that being very important, because it's that person whose career I followed as a youth. So when she won an Oscar, it felt well deserved. Whether or not you like Erin Brockovich, her being recognized, I think, was really important. Denzel Washington winning. Incredible moment.
Despite the fact it was for the wrong film.
Fair, and sometimes that happens with the Oscars.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that much, but yes, I agree with you. I mean, it's a huge night. I mean, huge moment.
Yeah, and it's Julia Roberts who gives him his Oscar, and which is cool because they co-starred together in The Pelican Brief, and then for her to hand it to him, it was like really special because you felt like and when you have those moments where like the friend is passing it off to them, like that's like such a cool thing. And Denzel Washington, I mean, like he should be given 50,000 Oscars. Like every time he steps on screen, I'm like, give him an Oscar. I honestly really wanted to see him win for Fences because it was such an incredible performance. Like he's so incredible and so iconic. So that winning, and then this one is very, very special. Leonardo DiCaprio. finally winning his Oscar is just one of those ultimate Academy Awards moments, especially if you were a 12-year-old girl when Titanic came out, and him finally winning, because he had deserved it for several performances prior, and he finally wins it for The Revenant. I set off a glitter cannon in our apartment, and we moved out of that apartment, and we're still finding that glitter like 5 years later. So
take money from our
security deposit. What's all this glitter from? Well,
glitter bomb.
It's when Leo won. So those are like my honorable mentions of things that I felt like I just wanted to mention quick before I get into my top 3. But I wanted to bat it over to you. Do you want to give your first top 3?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually one of the ones I was going to talk about was Leo.
Oh no!
And not necessarily for me, but one of my happiest moments was, I know you were such a Leo fan.
Yeah.
And you were so excited that night. You had the Titanic dress on. And
yes, the Rose to Whitby Cater dress when she is at the back of the Titanic, when she first meets Jack. I was wearing a replica, screen accurate, of that dress.
And you have 2 friends that we invite over. Everybody's very quiet, but they were having a lot of fun. We were all so excited for you in that moment. We felt like you were this proud, girlfriend, mother figure to Leo. I don't know.
Let's just start with girlfriend and stop the sentence there. Because I like that first description a lot better than the second one.
Take my foot out of my mouth and move on. No, but honestly, that was fun. That was a lot of fun. It really
was, because and he gave such a wonderful speech. He looked so old Hollywood glamorous that night, and he so deserved it. That was an incredible performance, but it was also and already, at this point, obviously, has a very long career ahead of him, but already a lot of career-defining performances prior to that. So it was just, really nice to finally see him awarded in that way for everything he's done for film. And it was just, my longest Hollywood crush. I was very, very excited he finally won an Oscar.
Yeah, that was cool.
So was that your number 3 spot?
I don't really have it any order, but that
fair.
sounds good.
All right, fine, fair. So my number 3 spot is The Shape of Water winning Best Picture. The Shape of Water is one of those films that I almost don't like talking to people about, because I love it so much, I care not how anyone else feels about it. And if that sounds harsh, it's because when I watched this movie the first time, and this is no exaggeration, and I know I'm a crier, but hear me out on this one. When the movie was over, I had tears streaming down my face because I had seen something so beautiful, I didn't know how to comprehend what I had just experienced. I felt like film had been revealed to me again anew. It was like I was watching cinema happen for the first time. And you and I were already fans of Guillermo del Toro's work, very excited to see this film, but what I ended up seeing, I couldn't quite put into words. And years later, when I watched that film, we recently got to watch it again on the big screen, I still can't explain what happens when that movie ends, except I just feel like I've seen beauty and love in motion, and I can't comprehend how that's able to happen in that film. And so when it wins Best Picture, it, to me, one of my really honest negative points as a movie fan is I don't have a favorite movie. I have a really hard time defining a favorite movie, but there'd be a real argument to be made for The Shape of Water being my favorite film. It honestly deserved that so much. It's such a great Best Picture. It's what all Best Pictures should aspire to be.
Yeah, that was on my list, and I agree with you completely. You and I have the same feelings about it. It's just, we love talking about it, but don't want to, we almost put a wall from the back end of it because it is important to us, and there is sometimes some negative talk with it, and we just don't want to hear it because that film just deeply is everything of cinema that we want. And then for a film like that type of film to win Best Picture is really quite, I think, phenomenal and exciting. So that was huge. It kind of goes into my number 2 then, which was directors over the last few years. Now, I can't start this by not saying, there is a female director, lack of representation that
deficit.
has been in. Yeah. And, you know, I know you talked about Catherine Bigelow. I'm so happy she won. I don't know, again, if that was the film that should have, you know, broken through, because I think Avatar probably, in hindsight, is probably the film that should have been the award winner that year over Hurt Locker.
That movie's terrible. And I have no problem. Great ride, Disney. Terrible movie, bro. Hate that movie.
Yeah, how many times do you go back for the Hurt Locker?
I'd go back for the Hurt Locker on an easy Sunday.
But I think I have to
Avatar.
look at it as was more an event. But that's Sophia Coppola to me should have won over Peter Jackson for Lost in Translation.
Well, because Peter Jackson should have won for Fellowship, not Return.
Right. You know, and that's a tough one because you want to reward him. He deserves the Oscar, but where do you put that in? So obviously there is a lack of representation there that we can't ignore. And I don't know what the answer for that is. Do you think that that should be a split category like they do with the acting categories?
No, I just think that Hollywood should be less white and less male. I think that's your solution. Honestly, I think there's a systemic problem in Hollywood that goes beyond just the Oscars, and there's a little, you know, so the argument being made of like, you know, how do we kind of solve the Oscars problem? You solve the Hollywood problem first. Because there are a lot of incredible female voices. Greta Gerwig not being nominated last year is a very egregious blind spot, I think, by the Academy. You know, that was, and I think you've seen that consistently through the years. I would make a hard argument that Catherine Bigelow not only was the most deserving director that year, but and I think an argument can be made whether or not that should be Best Picture, but I 100% think she was the best director that year.
But I do want to talk about the positive, and to me, that is the last batch of best directors that I think deserve a lot of credit though too, because I think that argument should be made, but it's not to take away from the work that we've seen, and that starts back with Alfonso Cuarón with Gravity, and then that's going to move on to Alejandro Inarritu. I always pronounce it wrong, so thank you. Where he back-to-back Oscars with Birdman and then The Revenant. And then you have Damien Chazelle for La La Land, which you and I both completely agree that he should have won that year.
Yeah.
And then my favorite, which is where I wanted to go, which is my moment, is Guillermo del Toro. To me, one of my all-time favorite Oscar moments is Del Toro's big smile on stage. Just how happy he was winning that. Like, I just absolutely love it, and he deserved it. And then you follow that up last year, you have Alfonso Cuarón then again for Roma.
Yeah.
And then you have last year Bong Joon-ho, who wins for Parasite. And if anybody knows Bong Joon-ho's, go and see his film catalog. He is phenomenal.
Yeah, he's a genius.
I mean, his filmography is just amazing. Mm-hmm. So he deserves, and Parasite was a phenomenal film. So
Parasite's one of those movies where it's just like, I feel like it takes almost like a year and if not a year more to just really like understand what that movie did. Just so incredible. It's so incredible. It comes back to me in waves sometimes where I'm like, I'll remember a scene from it and I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, the fact that Guillermo del Toro is a Best Director Oscar is a moment. Like,
oh yeah, that's an Oscars moment.
You know, so that makes me very happy. So that's my moment.
Nice. And for my number 2, do you know what my number 2 is?
I do not.
I think I pretty much threatened you that you weren't allowed to put it on your list.
Now I do.
So my number 2 moment is an acceptance speech. It is Tom Hanks's acceptance speech for when he won for Philadelphia. If you're not familiar with the acceptance speech, pause the podcast at this moment, go watch it on YouTube, and then come back.
When you're done crying.
Yeah, because I'll pretty much cry saying this. So when I taught a film class when I at the high school I was at previously to the one I'm at now, and we watched Philadelphia as a class, and then I showed them the acceptance speech. It's a true Oscars moment because I love acceptance speeches that can talk about broad concerns, that can be, you know, deeply personal, that are emotional. Listen, I like a happy acceptance speech, but I really like an emotional acceptance speech. I'm a fan of it, and I tend to get pretty weepy during the Oscars, so it's just like watching people's dreams come true. And when Tom Hanks wins for Philadelphia, he said, the streets of heaven are far too paved with angels tonight. We know their names and we count them. I can't even do it because I'm going to start crying. But like, he says this because of the AIDS epidemic, unfortunately, a lot of times the lack of attention that was being given to it. And he takes this moment, which is such a career-defining moment, to really honor the people who had lost their fight with AIDS. It is a truly incredible moment. And listen, he was already Tom Hanks at that part of his career. And if you think about how long ago that was and how many performances we've gotten since, I think he's such a treasure. And I'm not saying anything new that hasn't been said 1,000 times over, but that is my all-time favorite acceptance speech, is when he takes that Oscar for Philadelphia. I'm so emotional right now. I might cry just thinking about it.
Well,
so what's your number 2, Ryan?
Well, no, this will be my last one.
Oh, it's your last one. I'm sorry. I can't do math.
Yeah, I think we're all over on the numbers. Mine would be, it has to be just as emotional, James Franco and Anne Hathaway hosting the Oscars. Just, I mean, breathtaking, unforgettable.
So awkward.
But actually kind of, mine's just the little moments, right? Like, and it sounds goofy, but it is. Yeah. Like, you and I we love Hollywood, we love the fun side of Hollywood, not the dark side of Hollywood. We love movies. We like seeing the celebrities in a room together and doing things. So, like, Ellen's selfie, like, that's a fun moment that I enjoy from the broadcast. Like, so it's just the acceptance speeches like you talk about when they hit, when you have somebody win for, best animated short that you've never heard of before, and they get up there and they just give an emotional speech. Like, just these are the moments that I really just love sitting down, and it's because somebody's dreams coming true. And some of those moments are way better or way more emotional and interesting, because what happens is a lot of times when you get to the bigger names, like, they have to hit so many people that they have to thank.
Because there's so many people that go into that whole experience.
And a lot of them have been winning awards through the season, so some of that emotion, but those smaller awards are where you get that emotional moments. And by
smaller, like, the people you don't know who they are.
I apologize, I don't mean it like that. I just mean not the big ones that everybody's going to talk about, but again, the ones that are just, and kind of, I love the envelope snafu a couple of years ago. Like, I know that's probably like a bad mark for the Oscars, and they probably want to forget it, but from just an entertainment standpoint, it was hilarious. It was fun to watch. It was interesting, and both films, La La Land and Moonlight, which were dead heat all year, to both get some type of recognition. Now, Moonlight gets to go home with the trophy and always have that, but La La Land getting their moment to be up there, it's just, and how everybody handled it that night, I thought was great.
Well, because it was like all class just all around. Yeah. It was such incredible. So I'm going to say, that was actually my number 1 Oscars.
Oh my gosh. Too. I'm so sorry.
No, why are you sorry? No, I actually think it's kind of, it's kismet that we should pick it the same. And I honestly should have thought about it at some point that you may have, because it's one of those moments where, you and I stayed up for like 5 hours afterwards because we were so amped. We're like, what just happened? This does not happen at the Oscars. Yeah. And the whole, like,
we were like JFK conspiracy theorists.
Oh my gosh, How
did this happen?
You were like Kevin Costner, back to the left. Like, it was the most insane, like analytical deep dive. But the problem is we're both like hopped up on sugar and like trying to figure out what's happening, and then just like being so enthralled by this all unfolding. And the coolest thing is like, you get to watch someone be a total class act in a moment that probably has to feel so demoralizing. Yeah. And then, like, additionally on top of it, it's like La La Land and Moonlight are both incredible films for very different reasons. And I think what you get to have is like the celebration of a film like La La Land, but then Moonlight getting the recognition it like so richly deserved. And I agree with you completely. In that way, they both get to be iconic. But yes, I mean, we all know Moonlight's the best picture, but like you get to have this other portion of it. So it's like just kind of a cool shared moment. And I think that's what I love about the Oscars. I like when the Oscars feel really unpredictable. I don't like it when you know who's going to win in terms of like, it's been so campaign, so like you just know, with the exception of one award, which we'll talk about next week when we talk about our Oscars predictions, which 100% this person should win. If they don't win, I'm going to burn our house to the ground. And
It seems a little extreme.
It does feel a little extreme. That's how I feel about the Oscars. We just got our stuff
in. I mean, again, this desk probably should get burned,
but I think and I think you said it nicely. Like, it is a lot of times like the little moments, like, and a lot of it comes down to accept like the right kind of acceptance speeches where it's just like it just like hits, and you're like, I don't even know you, but I'm sad and proud for you all at the same time. Like, yeah, and I mean sad when they're like, you know, like thanking like someone who's deceased in their life.
Yeah.
Or like, I love Diablo Cody when she wins for Best Original Screenplay for Juno, and she said, and to my family for just loving me the way I am.
Yeah.
Like, that's such a cool moment. Yeah. Like, how do you not get emotional with that? And I think that's just the whole fun thing of it is, like, you're watching dreams be realized. You're watching this, like, you know, incredible celebration. And, you know, it can be an incredible platform for change and hard conversations on a night when people want to celebrate, but you also can have that moment to kind of, like, have that resonance of reminding people of the work that needs to be done. It feels celebratory. Who doesn't want a little celebration right now? So I'm like hotly anticipating next week. I'm ready to be surprised. I want something crazy and fun to happen.
I have 2 questions to kind of finish up this podcast with you.
Go forth.
Host, no host. What are you pro?
Host. Please don't. I don't like. All right, here's the jam. It worked fine last year. I didn't mind it. I didn't 100% miss it, because I think essentially by having celebrity appearances, you kept having, like, you had multiple hosts is how it felt.
Yeah.
I like a host. I like the tradition of it. I think they've made it an almost impossible task for someone to want to take it on, because there's so much criticism that comes with it and so much work and so little reward for having done so. But I like a host. Even when it's a train wreck like James Franco and Anne Hathaway, I still like a host.
And finally, how many times have you made your acceptance speech in front of the mirror for winning an Oscar?
Oh my God, 1,000 times. Do you want to know my ending line to my acceptance speech? Ryan Tocci, my favorite movie of all time is the one we made together. Thank you for your support.
Well, jeez. And on the anniversary of us dating,
yeah.
I feel that's...
Oh my goodness, it is!
Oh.
Look at that.
All right. Well, I got nothing after that.
So everyone, please, if
I'm
you're
the proud husband, father type figure.
Swear to God, if you ever call me a mother figure to Leonardo Dicaprio ever again, he's like 20 years older than me. All right, guys. So if you're not already following us on our social media, follow us at How Could You Podcast on Instagram, How Could You Pod on Twitter. You can find How Could You Podcast on Facebook. You can send suggestions always via email to howcouldyoupodcast@gmail.com. If you can, please hit that subscribe button. Oh, I can't believe I just said that. Leave us a review. That really helps with our visibility, although I think Ryan's expletive content is going to hurt our visibility today. But, please, if you have a chance to leave a review, that does really help us out.
Until next time we get together, mother as many people as you can, father as many people as you can, and enjoy the Odyssey. Matt?
No, you have to end it that way. It's so fucking great.